up guys, I'm Kevin Rogers with On Point Pro Styles Window Tinting in Gainesville, Georgia. I'm doing a plotter video today, specifically on my Workhorse 2. I've had this machine a couple years now, I've learned a lot about it, and I want to share some of that stuff with you. So this is kind of a recap of the other videos that I've done for Plotter Depot. Definitely, if you haven't seen those, check those out. They'll help get you started and get you set up anyways. But this is some, I don't know, some tips, tricks, and also some recaps of some things that are very important to know when it comes to running this machine. I have tape on my machine, as you might have seen in the other videos. If not, here's what I have. I have a layer of exterior painter's tape, which is kind of like vinyl, because I have Gorilla Tape on top of it. It allows the Gorilla Tape to peel off of it. It's the only reason why the yellow tape's there. And then I have a strip of Gorilla Tape that I cut on. So it's right over the cut strip, obviously not interfering with the Neuro rollers or anything like that. But mine's wore out. You can kind of see where it's kind of ground into the tape. You get these white strips. It makes it really easy to see when it's starting to wear out the tape, and it's kind of affecting my cuts. So I know it's not my blade. The blade that I have in there we'll talk about in a little bit, but I was gonna go ahead and change the strip so you can kind of see how that goes. So I'm gonna move my cutter head down to the left side, and then I'm gonna just grab the tape, and you'll see how the yellow tape, the purpose of it is so that this Gorilla Tape peels off pretty clean without leaving residue behind that I'll have to clean off after. So we're gonna move this over. The blade holder is out, so we'll peel all this off, and I'll show you how we cut a new strip. So here's how I do mine. Gorilla Tape, as far as I know, only comes in like this 2-inch width, so which is much too big for the, well, it's a waste of tape really. So I lay out some of that yellow exterior tape out on my table, and then I mark 55 inches on the tape so I know where to cut it off at, and I can just install it to the machine. So we're gonna lay this out, and one pull is gonna give us 2 strips. So we're gonna cut it in half. And we'll put this right at the end. We'll get it down here to this 55 mark, which I should have put higher, but it's all right. And then we're gonna cut it off right at the 55. And then, without being perfect, we're just gonna run the blade down the center of the tape. So we create, in essence, 2 strips. And what I like to do with the extra is just peel it up from here. Gorilla Tape is extremely strong, and you see how easy that's peeling. That's literally the only purpose of that yellow tape. So we're gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna move my cutter head toward the left. I like to apply from the right side to the left side. Careful not to let the tape touch itself, bond to itself, I should say. Place it right over where the cut strip is. And you want to make sure you go slow and get it to smoothly lay out. Now we'll take our cutter head and we'll move it back to the right. So we'll just move the cutter head out of our way, and then we'll lay down the rest of the tape. Make sure it's nice and smooth, no bumps in it, and that's ready for a blade. So that's how I do it. You see how quick and easy it was, and that gives me a nice surface. Why do I use the Gorilla Tape? Let me cover it real quick. I've tried all kinds of different things, from just the standard cutting strip that the machine comes with up to the Gorilla Tape, and I found that Gorilla Tape gives the surface just what it needs for the micro precision that window tint needs to cut and cut right. Window tint, remember, 1.5 mils thick is 1.5 human hairs thick. It's very, 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 very thin. So the room for error is very low, and you have a 3 mil liner. 3 mil, less than half the thickness of a hair. So that's very low for any imperfections in the cuts. So I believe, based on what I've done, that this allows just a little bit of a softness to the layer that allows the tint to kind of move up and down as the blade moves across it and help it not to cut through. So I've been using it for a long time now, and I love it. So I do recommend it. Okay, so we had some technical issues. We should sound a little bit better. The mic wasn't working. We've got it fixed now. So let's keep moving forward. The next step I want to talk about, we've talked about the Gorilla Tape and the tape I use for the Gorilla Tape. Now it's the blades. So I have a couple of blade holders. I don't really know what I did with my 45-degree blade holder. These are the exact same blade holders, but I have a 30-degree blade in this one for tint, and then I have a 60-degree blade in this one for PPF. 60 degree means it's more of a real fine tip, real sharp, real pointy, like a needle. And then the 30 degree is a little bit more, less blunt. So it's for thinner materials such as tint. They do make a 25, I'm not a fan. I'm a big fan of the 30. I started using Clean Cut brand blades. I've had this blade now probably in this holder for 6 months, and it's done phenomenal. So I'm definitely gonna stick with the Clean Cuts. But Let's drop this in the machine. So we wanna drop this in and make sure that that shoulder drops all the way down. So you wanna make sure this is backed out far enough that that shoulder drops all the way down. And then we're just gonna screw this to tighten it. This top piece should overlap that shoulder. When we get it to where it stops, you don't need to crank it, it's plastic. So you're just gonna turn it to snug it. That's all it needs, just snug it. Moving straight from that, I'm gonna push the reset button as if I had just turned the machine on. And it'll do this every time. It resets the cutter head, it homes the cutter head, which is always all the way to the right. So this is an origin-based machine. I've got a roll of film set up on the back of the media rollers. Since we're there, I'll go ahead and discuss those. There's 3 different positioning for the media rollers. I found that the 2 closest to the machine is just right for the tint, even vinyl rolls and such. So it's just wide enough it doesn't flop off and fall into the floor, whereas the other 2 are much closer. So this tends to work out really well. My static string is actually elastic. I beefed it up, so I've got it lower than the roll, and I'll show you why. So I've got the roll placed to where when I unroll it, the liner is gonna be on the machine and the film's gonna be up. So we're gonna take our static string and put it in front of the film, roll some out, and we're gonna load it into the back of the machine. So I do this at an angle, and I try to get this first point, this first corner to come through, and I'll sort of just flatten the other side as it comes through, and it makes it really easy to pull through. So let's talk about positioning real quick. Let me move the cutter head out of the way. So I'm gonna hit my on-off button. I'm gonna use these arrows now, force down, which is left now, to move that out of the way. So I use 40-inch rolls. This machine loves 40-inch rolls and 24-inch rolls. That's about it as far as the Workhorse 2, and that's really all you need. But roller positioning, I have a roller pushed off to the side. It's what I call a dead roller, it does nothing. I have my first roller on the right over the very first knurl roller. The knurl roller is the one on the bottom. So the rubber roller is over the very first one. If you look at the top right here, you can see this is markings for where your knurl rollers are, and your rollers have to be in one of those spots. It cannot be in between. So first one for a 40-inch roll is right here, and for a 24-inch roll. So I'm gonna slide my film down. You gotta be careful. So I kind of rock the film in and out, and I'll move it just to the right side of the knurl roller. And if we look down the machine, I have another roller here. I obviously skipped this one. I have another roller here, another roller here, another roller here, and it ends on a 40-inch roll just right. So now I can maximize the amount of film that I can cut on. Let's talk about origin, and then we'll talk about where you have to set your origin. So I'm gonna bring the cutter head back to the right as if the machine just turned on. So we loaded our film. All right, now that we've moved it where it's supposed to be and we wanna keep it here, we're gonna hit the enter button, and that brings us back to the speed force. That means that this is ready to start cutting where it's at. Let's talk about the speed and force. I recommend everybody to cut at about I think it's 252 or 254. Speed means obviously how fast it's gonna go. The faster it goes, the faster a problem turns into a big problem. So keep your speed down until you're really familiar with the machine. I have mine at 360, it's very comfortable, cuts out an average of 2 front doors in an average of about 55 to 60 seconds. It's plenty fast enough for a set of doors. My force is up at 72 because I've been adjusting my force as I go. As your cut strip wears, as your blade wears, you're gonna bump your force up a little bit. Now, as you saw, I replaced the strip, so I'm probably gonna have to go down on the force, but we'll see. I'm actually gonna take it down and we're gonna do some testing, but that's kind of just a real recap of your speed and your force. Keep your speed down in the 200s, mid 200s, until you're really familiar with the machine, and I don't recommend much faster than 360, because like I said, in the event something happens, film bunches up or what have you, it's going to go bad very fast. Film bunching, since I discussed it, or since I mentioned it, film bunching is a couple of different reasons why that's gonna happen. It's either you're past the blade, or you're cutting past a roller and it's dragging the film back in, or you don't have cut on pull set in the software, and we'll look at that in a minute, or you have the wrong blade in. If you're using too sharp of a blade, it's gonna puncture down into the cut strip and drive film, and it's gonna just trash the film. So make sure it's the 30 degree, you're running the right force, the blade is out as far as it's supposed to be, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But let's do some test cuts and see where we're at. So I'm gonna lower the force, and while I'm talking about it, I'm gonna lower this down to about 60 grams. If I turn the machine off right now and turn it back on, it's gonna turn on at 72. So if I want the machine to turn on at 60 from now on, you hit the enter button again. twice. So once I hit that enter button the second time, it sets that into memory. All right, so right here on the machine, we have this test button. That's the very first thing we need to utilize before we do any cutting or anything else. This test button cuts out 1-inch squares with a triangle in the middle that we can use to say how close are we, and then we'll move on to another test. So without wasting a whole bunch of film, we're just gonna hit this test button one time. It cuts out a 1-inch square. We're gonna hit our on off. We're gonna roll some film out. Let's take a look. First thing I do is I drag my finger across the back. Did it cut through? Doesn't seem like it did. Next thing we wanna do is how easy does that peel out? It feels groovy. So we're gonna do another test cut. I'm gonna, without moving anything around, I'm just gonna hit the off button and it moves it back to exactly where it was. But now I'm gonna set the origin past that because I don't wanna cut the same square, and hit enter again. We'll do a little bit up on the force and we'll hit test cut. I'm looking for that perfect, that was a little sticky peeling, so I'm just trying to see if I can get a little bit cleaner. Let's test it. That felt excellent. Now you saw I was cutting at 72 with a bad cut strip, and it looks like I might be able to bump it back down to about 63, which is very comfortable. So let's reset this. I'm ready to cut a strip now. So before I start cutting patterns, that's just to get us close. So let's roll a little bit of film out past those squares, and we're gonna move our cutter head back to basically a starting cutting position where I would basically cut patterns. And we're gonna come over to the software. Doesn't matter what vehicle you might have pulled up, but let's use this calibrate function. This is really neat. So I have a 40-inch roll. I'm gonna select a 38-inch strip, and it's gonna cut a 1-inch strip across the entire cut strip to see if I have any imperfections in the cut strip. So I'm gonna hit cut, and then the machine will cut out that 1-inch strip. All right, so it's gonna purposely have a round side and a square side so that it can test both of those functions as well. So same thing, I'm gonna just gently drag across the bottom of the strip and see, did it cut through anywhere? Nope. So now I'm gonna grab one end and I'm gonna peel it up and away. That was a clean tear. That was a clean tear. I'm actually gonna bump it up to 66, and you see it came out past this, so I'm gonna utilize the film better, move it back. You see we've used 6 inches of film and we're dialing in our cut. So let's do another cut strip. All right, perfect. Let's check this out. See if it cut through. Did not. That was even better. So I feel like after those tests and only using 8-9 inches of film, we're ready to test with a pattern. Now I wouldn't go in and start cutting doors. I think you're starting to get the idea of what the purpose of this is. So we'll cut this off. Our origin is set. We leave it at 66. I'm gonna set the memory, and then I'm gonna cut out a quarter window, not a full door. Start off with quarter windows, something small. Now I would take my quarter windows and I'd do a couple sets so that we can kind of test across the strip. I'm gonna rotate this 190. We'll talk about the software here in a minute too, give you some tips and tricks on that. So now we're not killing ourselves using too much film and wasting our film. All right, so we're gonna cut these 4 out. By the way, since we're here, origin 0 means right here. We have to have all our patterns start in the bottom corner. So if I was to add just this, you'll see it's gonna put it in at 0. It'll always do that. So that's where you set your blade. Your blade is 0. That's where you set your blade to start cutting. So it's always gonna be here. So always make sure your patterns are down and left on this nesting panel so you know where you're cutting. So let's go ahead and cut these. So in the event you get in kind of a pickle and you need to just peel the patterns and then adjust your blade after, that's one way to do it. But as you can see, my machine is peeling quite nicely, and I'm happy with those results. So now I feel good enough about that. I would have no hesitation cutting out a big back glass, a couple of doors. I'm ready to go. And I know that my pressure now is 66, down from 72 with a bad cut strip. Next, we'll go to the software, and I'll show you some stuff in the software that you should know in order to keep your machine and yourself running. When I first open my software, based on my settings and all, this is what I see. This is called the nesting panel. And as you can see, it's automatically. So the first thing you want to do with your software is make sure that you go to your edit options, and you want to go through these. Default layout, I don't want the cut list.
I want nesting. So I have nesting selected, so it always opens up in the nesting panel, and obviously I have inches. Plotter, pull mode cutting, tint, yes. Pull mode cutting PPF, in the event you have PPF, no. Post feed length is when the last pattern is done cutting. It's how much film do you want the machine to feed out so that you don't have to adjust it to cut it. 2.4 is perfect. It's about a 1/4 inch past the last pattern, so I don't have to keep repositioning the film. Nesting is important. Default film width. Again, I use 40s, so I have 40 inches here. So every time I pull up the software, my width of the roll here is going to be, it's going to mimic the size of my roll, and that's another important point. So set that to your main rolls that you use most of the time. Because for example, let's say that I'm doing PPF and I have a 36-inch roll in here. This is deceiving because some of this doesn't exist up here. So I would change this to 36, so now it mimics the width of a 36 and I know where my boundaries are. Let's say you put a 24-inch roll in, change that to 24, and now you know where your boundaries are. Again, this is 0, so your patterns always start down here. So the width of your roll is extremely important. Don't worry about the length. Obviously that's infinity, well, 100 feet. But your width is extremely important. If I shut this down and reopen it back up, it's going to go to my default, which is a 40-inch roll. So make sure you utilize that. Very important. That you have the same width here that you have on your machine. And remember, the 0 is where you set your blade to start cutting. We'll go over to the blades, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about the blade depth and what to look for, and then that'll conclude this video. Okay, so back to the blades and the blade holders, and that'll kind of conclude this. I've been bouncing around a little bit, I apologize. My mind's going everywhere. I just wanna make sure I cover all of this. So you see I marked 30 on this holder, I marked 60 on this holder, and I have a 45 floating around somewhere. I don't do a lot of vinyl, but I do some, so I'll have to dig for that later. But blade depth, how much blade should stick out of the holder? It's so small, it's really, really hard to capture on this camera, but we took a close-up shot of it, and we'll pop that in there so you can actually see. When we say half the thickness of a debit card, we literally mean about half the thickness of a debit card for the 30-degree blade, for the tint blade. And again, that's because of the thickness of the material. It's a very, very, very thin, microscopic amount of room for error. Whereas a 60, PPF is much thicker. You're talking 7 to 10 mils. So you can see, I'm just pushing this back button so I can push the blade out and kind of show you the point, which is also how you remove the blade, by the way. You can see it's out a tiny bit further because of the thickness of the material, but you'll do the same testing sequence on your PPF or your vinyl as you would tint. You just might need more blade depending on the material. So vinyl's about 4 mil thick, PPF is about, let's call it 8-9 mils thick, and then tint is only 1.5 mil thick in most cases. Some are 2 mil thick. So that's gonna dictate how deep the blade's gonna be. So let's see, am I missing anything? Yes, last thing on the blade. The blade acts as a bearing. It has to spin. I don't know if you can see it spinning, but it has to spin extremely free inside this blade holder. As it's cutting, it's like a knife. It's cutting, and then as it makes a turn, the blade spins to keep cutting. If that locks up, I've had one bind up on me because I didn't know. And when it bound up on me, I got terrible cuts. It was trash. And I found out I couldn't get the blade out of the holder. It wasn't spinning. So now, take the blade out every once in a while when you're doing some cleaning, blow it out real good. I don't know if you can see the corrosion on this one. I actually have to WD-40 it, but yeah, look at that. That's just from normal use. This blade's about 6 months old, and I need to obviously clean this and put some WD-40 on it. Keep that thing lubed up so it spins nice and free inside that blade holder. I did not expect that, but here it is live. Keep that blade clean and keep it lubricated with some WD or something so it spins nice and free inside that holder. So don't forget about your blade holder, your weekly maintenance. Check your strip. About every Monday, check your strip, check your blade, lube your blade, clean the machine. That's it. That's all I got. Like I said, it bounces around a little bit. I tried to write out a list that never works out. We just went for it, threw it all together. I hope you watch the video in its entirety, take notes, and I guarantee you, utilize a lot of these steps. This is what I've been doing for years with this machine, and it's almost flawless for me every single day. So guys, that's it. Reach out to Plotter Depot with any questions. Reach out to me, Tint and Tools, tintdepot.com. High Tech Films, if you don't know, you should. We'll see you on the next one.